This year, 2011, we published a book called Already Compromised, based on research conducted by America's research group headed by a man called Britt Beamer. Already Compromised was a book detailing the results of the research in which Christian colleges took a test on the state of their faith, and the final exam is in. And to start with, in part 1, there are 2 verses of scripture that sadly sum up what's happening. 1 Corinthians 14 verse 8, "For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for the battle?" What we found from the research is there's an uncertain sound emanating from our Christian colleges and from many of our churches. And then Exodus 8:28, "You shall not go very far." What has that verse got to do with this? Well, in the context, Pharaoh didn't want the people of Israel to go far from Egypt. And we live in a world where the world does not want the church to go far from Egypt, far from the world. And unfortunately, many in Christendom have stayed close to the world, and they've not gone far. Many of you will have heard of the name Bruce Waltke. He's acknowledged to be one of the outstanding contemporary Old Testament scholars of our day. He was Professor of Old Testament at Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando, Florida, and he actually was let go from there over an issue in regard to his stand on evolution. Sadly, he's now lecturing at Knox Theological Seminary in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the institution that was actually commenced by Dr. D. James Kennedy. A statement he has made I want to concentrate on at the beginning of this session. It's this one: the tension between faith and science. Stop right there for a moment. One of the things that we hear over and over again as I travel around: do you believe in the Bible? Do you believe in science? But science versus the Bible. But science has shown you can't trust the Bible. Well, if you believe the Bible, then you can't believe in science. I hear this over and over again. A supposed battle between faith and science. Let's read on in this quote. The tension between faith and science with regard to the origin of species. See, right there, the origin of species. You're not talking about observational science, which builds our technology. You're talking about history. You're talking about origins, the past. And this is the confusion that many people have. But he goes on, is one of the most important and urgent issues that confronts the church today. Actually, it certainly is an urgent issue that confronts the church today, because I believe it is why we are losing the structure of Christianity in our Western world. He goes on, this is a unique opportunity to seek to narrow the gap between faith and science. Here's the problem that we've got. When Christian academics use the word science, I'm going to suggest to you they don't really mean what many people think it means. In fact, what we really need to do to understand this and what they're really saying, we need to understand what is science. I remember having lunch with a man who had very advanced qualifications in theology. And he looked at me and he said, "So do you take the theological view of Genesis, or do you take the scientific view? Do you believe in science, or do you take the theological view?" And I said to him, "Can I ask you a question?" "Yes." "What do you mean by science?" And he looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you use the word science and scientific. I'd like you to define what you mean by that." "Science." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I don't really know." You know, that was an interesting situation, because I said, "Well, do you know what the word science means?" I said, "If you look up the root meaning of the word science, it means knowledge. It means state of knowing, knowledge." And one of the things that's not being taught in our churches, in our schools, it's not being taught to people. They don't really understand. There's a big difference between observational or operational science, that is, using your 5 senses in the present to gain knowledge about the present world. That's what builds our technology. That's why we can have jet airplanes and computers. And in fact, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, a creationist or an evolutionist, we all have the same science, the same observational science. We all agree on how to build that technology. We can applaud the scientists, even the secular scientists, who put the rover on Mars, and applaud their great science. There are secular scientists who are great scientists, and we can acknowledge that, and we should, when it comes to observational science. But then when they start talking about the origin of Mars, now they've stepped into historical science, beliefs about the past, history, interpretations about the past. There's a big difference between observational science and historical science. And that's something that many people don't understand. And I want to be able to teach you about this, and I thought one of the best ways to do it in this presentation, we just produced a new series of videos. This is a new step for us. They're a new concept in videos. They're called Check This Out. And there are 6 of these, and the one I want to show you deals with observational operational science. Now, I want to warn you about something. These videos are really produced for a modern culture that live in a computer-oriented culture with computer technology and used to these games that they play and all the rest of it. So this is for the younger generation, which means the older generation won't warn you about something. You have to listen fast. Okay? So I want you to get ready. Take a deep breath. Get some oxygen to your brains, okay? You need to hold on, okay? And I warn people as we get ready and as you watch these, if you sit there and listen quickly, we'll do a whole year's course on the philosophy of science in just a few minutes. Yeah, we will. You'll see it. Okay, you ready? Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts. Make sure your tray table is seat back to the upright position. Make sure your luggage is under the seat in front of you in the overhead locker. I fly too much. Here we go.
Have you ever heard this? Billions of years ago, there was an explosion in space. Or 100,000 years ago, this happened or that happened. Or even, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Question, how does anyone know? I mean, was anybody there to observe it? Well, actually somebody was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Check this out. First of all, we need to recognize that there is a huge difference between observational science and historical science. Both are valuable, but very different. Let's define the two real quick, shall we? Observational science is simply when we observe something and experiment to draw conclusions. It involves repeatable experimentation and observations in the present. It's through observational science that we find cures for diseases and build space shuttles, stuff like that. Now, through historical science, we consider things that happened in the past, but they cannot be checked in the same way. I mean, we don't have access to the past like we do the present because, well, it's gone, right? All we really have is speculation, or at best, circumstantial evidences of past events based on what we see in the present. That's not to say that we can't make intelligent guesses about the past, or form reasonable inferences from rocks or fossils in the present, but we certainly cannot directly test our conclusions because we cannot repeat the past. Got it? So, does that mean historical science is unimportant? Not at all. Let's drop an example down here for a minute and take a look at the Eiffel Tower. You know, that 19th century Parisian monument designed by Gustave Eiffel that stands 1,063 feet tall, which was built as the entrance for the 1889 World's Fair and is still the tallest building in Paris today, visited by millions of people each year? Yeah, that one. Well, guess what? Everything I just told you is true, but how do we test it? Well, applying observational science, we can, of course, observe the Eiffel Tower anytime we're in Paris. It's here in the present. Then, we can continue by testing the height and comparing it to all the other structures in Paris and confirm the claim that it is indeed the tallest building in Paris. But that's the extent of the kind of facts that can be proved by observational science in reference to this claim. How do we really know that Gustave designed it? How do we really know it was built in the 19th century as an entrance to the 1889 World's Fair? How do we really know how many people visited? That's all in the past. It can't be repeated. For that kind of information, we need to go outside the limits of observational science and discover what has been communicated to us through historical documents and eyewitness accounts. And furthermore, we have to believe those eyewitnesses and documents are trustworthy. The same is true when we talk about the origin of the Earth. The Earth is here. We all agree with that. So, does observational science confirm that the world was created by God? And are there trustworthy documents and eyewitness accounts that confirm it? Well, let's take the last part first. In short, what we're really asking is my original question: was anybody there to observe it? The answer is yes. God was there, and He told us how He created. He inspired people to write down His very words that became books that were compiled into a complete book called the Bible, which has been verified over and over again and has demonstrated itself to be totally trustworthy in all it claims and teaches. Even secular scholars will concede that the Bible accurately records historical events. Anyway, we have the most trustworthy revelation from the most trustworthy eyewitness. Now, what about observational science? Does it confirm the Bible? Yes. And what's extremely important to realize is the observable fact that the universe is logical and orderly. That makes sense only if its creator is logical and has imposed order on his creation. It doesn't make sense at all if the universe is just an accident of a huge explosion. Also, our minds are able to comprehend many things about the universe, and that's only possible if the creator of the mind gave us the ability and desire to explore the universe. It doesn't make sense if our brains are byproducts of chance because we couldn't trust their conclusions to ever be accurate. And lastly, it only makes sense that we can observe and repeat an experiment if the universe consistently obeys the same laws from day to day, which only makes sense if a lawgiver created it that way and upholds it. So to be bluntly honest, science itself, whether observational or historical, is only possible because God exists and the Bible is true. I could go on, but enough said.
Well, there you are. Philosophy of science in a few minutes. And by the way, that really does teach you that. It really does.